think all of you heard a BJP national spokesman make a remark on national television saying that Christianity came to India before it went to Europe. Now, that might sound a very, very innocuous statement, but the only thing is that it is not. Why it is not, and why we need to debunk such notions, which is actually rooted around the myth of Saint Thomas coming to India to spread Christianity. We have Maya Ramji with us from the United States, and she runs the Mission Kali website and the Twitter account. And I think most of us who are following Jaipur Dialogues would know about it because we routinely keep retweeting every Mission Kali tweet. Welcome, Maya Ramji. How are you? Hope you're doing well.
Namaskar, Namaskar, Sanjay ji. I've been well. Shubh
So I
Deepavali
just
to
want
you.
to know from you, especially for our viewers in the north of India, because I think in the south of India, people are still aware of this Saint Thomas myth. So please explain to them what exactly is this Saint Thomas myth that we are going to talk about. And after that, we will go deeper into it and see why it is important to debunk it.
Well, basically, the myth goes that Saint Thomas, who was one of Jesus's 12 disciples, after Jesus's death, went out east to Syria, to what is now Iran and Iraq. It was then called Persia and Babylon. Then going out to Gandhara, possibly, and then ending up in southwest India, now around Kerala. St. Thomas landed there, they say, around 52 CE. And there he was said to have converted a number of Nambudiri Brahmins in Kerala to Christianity until he was executed because due to jealousy. That's the myth. And Syrian Christians trace their origins back to supposedly when St. Thomas came and converted their ancestors. They claim that their ancestors were the original Nambudiri Brahmins of Kerala. That's the myth. But the truth is, it's certainly not even close to that. And even I should say, we'll go deeper into this, but I will say up front that even the Vatican does not believe that St. Thomas ever set foot in India, certainly.
But the San Thome Church is supposed to be in Mylapore near Chennai.
Yeah, we'll have to get into that. But first, I just want to talk about the true origins of this Thomas fellow. And I got my notes here. It's quite an extensive topic, and many people, even in the South, they don't necessarily know this history. So,
Okay. So I just want to, before you embark on this deeper into this, I just want to know why is it important for the Christian evangelists and even Catholics who want to convert the Indians to their faith to have this myth going, or as I would say, a complete hoax? Why they need to perpetuate this?
it's a good question, and there are many reasons for this. For one, I mentioned that the so-called Thomas Christians, aka Syrian Christians, they claim that they were the descendants of Brahmins converted by Thomas himself, and they want to be recognized as a separate caste for that reason. In addition to that, and I'll go into this, the San Thome Cathedral in Mylapore is a major pilgrimage site, and it brings in a lot of money and really it should be given the same treatment that the Babri Masjid Mosque was given. This myth is
Right.
also used to fool people because many people have this misconception that Christianity came with the British, when in reality there were other invaders that brought it over. But the point is they want to portray Christianity as being indigenous to India, just as much as Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, even Sikhism. It gives them that legitimacy that even Islam wouldn't necessarily get.
Okay. So they want to portray themselves to be as older to at least Sikhism, and then claim this to be an indigenous faith.
Yes,
And
yes.
they say that, okay, it is akin to the Dharmic faith or the Omkara faiths that we talk about. So they would
Yes.
probably try and lay claim to that kind of a status. Okay, so let's go into the myths now, that the deeper
So,
analysis of this.
yes. So the Thomas himself, according to some other sources, was actually a twin brother of Jesus. So the myth of Thomas came from the Gnostic text Acts of Thomas, which was authored by one Bardesanes, who is from Edessa, Syria. And he said that Jesus had a twin brother Thomas, Didymus. And then after Jesus' death, this Thomas fellow, whoever he was, went out to Syria, then to Persia and Babylon, now Iran and Iraq. However, there is no actual proof that this Thomas fellow, aka Didymus, actually went out there. Instead, it was actually a man named Thomas of Cana who was fleeing the Roman Christianization of Rome and Asia Minor, of Europe and Asia Minor. The Romans were gaining steam, and their version of Christianity was becoming the dominant version. All other versions were declared to be heretical and outlawed. The Christianity he spread had more Jewish roots and was different from Roman Christianity, which has its roots in Pauline Christianity, which disavows Jewish roots. The early Christians, like the Thomas Christians, they believed that only Jews could follow this path and did not allow Gentiles. But Pauline Christianity said that what was required of Jews, of good Jews, practicing Jews, would not need to be required of Gentile converts, like circumcision or maintaining kosher, etc., etc. So the legend goes this Thomas fellow came to a province of Fars, Persia. This is according to the Acts of Thomas. This was authored by Bardesanes once again, who was from Edessa, Syria.
Yeah, but I think this would be much later, isn't it? Because St. Paul is later in time compared to the chronology that is claimed for St. Thomas by the myth makers.
Yes, that's right. With the Pauline Christianity really started to rise around 70 AD, between 50 and 70 AD. So it doesn't make sense that this fellow Thomas went to India to flee persecution in 52 AD, or CE, I should say.
Right.
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense. The chronology doesn't make sense. And I'll go into when we actually have any proof of the arrival of the Syrian Christians in a little bit, but more on Thomas. So he ended up in Fars, Persia, and he started to spread Christianity in that area, with many people believing him to be mad, but then others fell under his spell. So people would convert, and then afterwards they would be under the guardianship of this Thomas fellow and his appointed priest. And that includes children who were separated from their families. Converts were then given sackcloth and doused their hair in oil, and they were made to look unkempt and disheveled. He particularly liked to target young virgin women, as well as children, because they're the most easily suggestible and the most vulnerable. The king of Fars was named Misdeus or Mazai, and he was alarmed at what this Thomas fellow was doing, but he became even more alarmed when a prince was converted. So he took action and he had his guards kill him. Now, let's take the setting of Acts of Thomas. According to Bardesanes, he describes a desert-like setting, which is more consistent with Persia or Babylon. One could even argue that it's consistent with Kandahar, now Afghanistan, if you went out that far. That's not consistent with the lush the lush forest setting of Kerala, and it's certainly not consistent with Mylapore. And the name of this king, Mazai, that's not even close to a Tamil name whatsoever, or even Malayalam. Not even close, wouldn't you say? Not even close.
Right.
So the timeline of the Thomas myth started with Christian refugees who were said to have come in either the 4th century or the 8th century. There's a bit more proof that they came in the 4th century, supposedly. They were most likely directly from Syria and Persia, fleeing the increasing, most likely Syria, because the Christianization of Europe and Asia Minor went out that far. It didn't go out so far as Persia. So they came directly from Syria. And they were basically fleeing the tyranny of the Roman version of Christianity. So that is consistent with the rise of Roman Christianity. Certainly not.
Roman Christianity, actually, it started persecuting people only after Constantine converted, and that was only 313. And even Constantine was not so severe as later on. I think it's only around 380 that Justinian came into power.
Yes.
That he started persecuting all other heretics or all other pagans big time. And that was the time that Christianity, the Roman Christianity, was made the state religion. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that is consistent. Yes, you're very correct. So that is most likely when the Thomas Christians came. They were fleeing that. But then later they invented their origin story and said that St. Thomas himself, and eventually they said that St. Thomas himself came to spread the gospel in Kerala and what is now Tamil Nadu, even though there was no proof even in the Gnostic texts. Bardesanes was said to have written about an eastern land, and it was implied to be India by later scholars, but as I described earlier, he describes a desert-like setting, but not a forest setting. So the Thomas myth began to get furthered by the explorer Marco Polo, who was said to have go out to the Far East, but in reality, he never set foot in India. The most farthest he may have gone was China, but even there's no proof. And he said that St. Thomas was buried in the southern tip of India, now what is now Tamil Nadu. But he, like I said, he never set foot in the subcontinent. He also made some wild claims about Sri Lanka, there's some sort of sepulchre of a saint, but there's no such proof. Later, the Portuguese came and took over Goa and what's now Kerala and part of Tamil Nadu as well. And they made some of their own edits to Acts of Thomas so that it would be consistent with the Thomas coming to India myth. And they claimed that in Mylapore, the Kapaleshwara temple was where Thomas was buried, so they destroyed the temple and built San Thome Cathedral on the top of that. And it's stuck ever since.
We need to reclaim the Kapaleshwar temple.
That's why I said it needs to be given the same treatment as Babri Masjid. But the Archaeological Society of India has not done a serious study of San Thome Cathedral and other cathedrals and other churches that were built on top of temple ruins in Tamil Nadu. They really need to. The same way that they paid attention to the site of the old Babri Masjid.
Yeah.
But as it took a long time for the Babri Masjid to get demolished, it's going to take a very long time for San Thome Cathedral to be demolished. Now, the myth was added on to later in later years to add that it was Nambudiri Brahmins that were the ones that killed Thomas. In the Acts of Thomas, the word that's used to describe what killed Thomas is berume, which means spear in Syriac. but it was confused accidentally and then deliberately with the word Brahmin. So then that lie stuck, basically. Then
Right.
that is the formation of the Thomas myth. And in a nutshell, again, this is a very extensive topic. And the lie has stuck around, and people have been trying to keep the lie going through various means.
Not only that, this lie has been actually further consolidated by even associating it with some of the great Tamil figures, such as Thiruvalluvar.
Yes. With your permission, I would like you to play a short clip of our Mission Kali's short film, Dharma with
Just
Dharmic Heritage
give me a
Protection
minute.
Law.
I'll transfer it to the desk for them to play it. Meantime, you please continue. They'll play it in about 2 minutes.
Okay, yes, certainly. So, many Christians particularly in southern India, like the former Archbishop of Madras, Reverend Dr. R. Ayurlappa, claimed that Thomas visited Tiruvalluvar, the famous Tamil sant who authored Tirukkural. That's right. That's pretty outlandish. But to further that lie, this guy was conned by one John Ganesh, who was a self-styled Bible scholar who developed the theory that Christianity had its origins in India and claimed to have authentic proof of like leaf writings, palm leaf writings, and copper plates with inscriptions that describe the meeting of Thomas supposedly with Tiruvalluvar. And the truth is, he had no such proof at all. He was asked to send it officially with proof, with verification done by a museum. What this fellow did was he developed a system where he faked the seal of a museum that supposedly housed all these artifacts, and then used the seal and sent those sealed photos to the Reverend to make them look authentic. And he did that for many, many, many years. He was given a lot of money by Reverend Ayurlappa, and he traveled all through India, including to Kashmir, to see if there was any sort of proof.
Okay,
And
here we have the clip.
okay, go ahead and play that. Make sure it's off mute.
Now let's look at some false claims of ownership made by Christian missionaries about our cultural treasures. Shaivism and Vaishnavism are separate from Vedic traditions and are of Dravida origins. Shiva is the primal cause of the universe, and its ruler is an idea borrowed from Christianity. And Shivism attained fullness only after the advent of Saint Thomas into India in 52 CE. They spread lies like Shiva taking the poison to protect creation was modeled after Jesus sacrificing himself to save humanity. They call Parameshwar, Avatara, Moksha, Bhakti, etc. as Christian concepts. Saint Thomas preached that God sent his son as savior. And a similar story was made up in Hinduism. Murugan worship was started in parts of India.
Yes, yeah, that's how deep the deception goes. That Thomas even inspired the formation of Shaiva Siddhant and influenced Tiruvalluvar in that way.
But there's some basic problems with that. The Shaiva Siddhant, the entire time concept and the logic concept and the cosmology that is part of Shaiva Siddhant would be considered heretical by the Christians. So
I
why
know.
would St. Thomas go and inspire this kind of a heretical teaching?
That's a good question why they would want to keep up this myth. But again, that ties to wanting to show that Christianity is indigenous to India and going back to St. Thomas himself. Even going so far as to fake with palm leaf writings and copper plates to show that there was a meeting of minds between Thomas and Tiruvalluvar. I mean, this is just insane. Eventually, though, this John Ganesh was caught and a police case was filed against him, and he's been in jail now.
Okay. Indian jail?
Yes.
Okay. But the myth making that he did, that still continues. That still continue to be used.
Yes, it's now so commonplace that every time, with like around like around Christmas or Easter, there's always some sort of article in mainstream media, Indian mainstream media like Indian Express, The Hindu, Times of India, about Saint Thomas and how he came and brought Christianity to India. There's always some sort of nonsense story like that. It's just very hard to dismantle. Though slowly the tide is starting to change. Slowly. One book I recommend for readers is The Myth of St. Thomas and the Kapaleshwar Temple by one Ishwar Saran. He is affiliated with Voice of India. The book is available online for free. It's a very extensive read. There's a lot, even I didn't know that, and I think it would be very illuminating for viewers to read that book.
Oh, yes, I think especially the Kapaleshwara temple needs to be reclaimed. I think somewhere along the line we need to start a movement to reclaim the Kapaleshwara temple. How is
Yes.
it that these, what is called? I think it's almost the same as the brutalities that they carried out, the Catholic Christians carried out in Goa. It is at par with that.
Yes,
And
indeed.
I cannot understand St. Thomas, whether he is patronized by the Portuguese Catholic Christians or the Syrian Christians. Isn't there a conflict between the two?
Initially, when the Portuguese arrived, the Syrian Christians actually turned on their Hindu benefactors who welcomed them in centuries earlier and let them thrive. In fact, they are the richest community in Kerala, and most of their chief ministers have been from that community. But when the Portuguese came, the Syrian Christians actually took their side and allowed them to make inroads and take over Kerala and let them rule. But what happened was the Portuguese forced them to conform to Roman Catholic rich and give up any sort of their old pre-Catholic traditions, which were more Jewish in origin. So they were forced to conform, and now they're practically another branch of the Roman Catholic Church. There is a remnant that does adhere to the rites of the pre-Catholic St. Thomas with the St. Thomas Church, but they're a minority. The majority of Syrian Christians now are basically Catholic. And there are a few Syrian Christians that recognize that the Portuguese also deceived them and oppressed them, just like they did to Hindus. But that's few and far between. The Portuguese were very smart to appropriate the myth of St. Thomas, which the Syrian Christians started. And that's how they were able, I suppose, to eliminate bad feelings between the two communities and assimilate the Syrian Christians into the larger Roman Catholic community.
Okay, right. That's very interesting. Now, is there any movement? You also mentioned about the Pope and the Vatican actually not owning it. And what's the story about that? The Pope Benedict himself actually contradicted it, and then there was some kind of a Christian pushback. Please tell us that story as well.
Oh, yeah. So in 2006, Pope Benedict, that was the Pope back then, he made a proclamation about Thomas, saying that he went to Syria, then went to Persia and Babylon, and that from there, Christianity traveled to Babylon. I mean, not to Babylon, to India. Indian Christians raised a stink about it because they believe that St. Thomas came to India itself, and that makes a difference. And when his proclamation was uploaded on the official Vatican website, they had to amend it to say that he traveled to India and spread Christianity, not that Christianity itself filtered from Persia and Babylon to India that way. But even among Indian bishops in the Catholic Church, they're starting to doubt the authenticity of the St. Thomas myth. And that's more consistent with what their higher ups in the Vatican believe. That there's no such proof that he himself came to India. But still, for reasons I listed earlier, they still want to, Indian Christians in particular, want to still keep it up. And the Vatican is not going to push back that strongly against that.
Oh yes, I suppose it suits Vatican as well.
Yes, it does.
And that is why that even someone as knowledgeable as the national spokesperson, the chief national spokesperson of the BJP, also uttered that. Usually, he's quite right about all the Indic matters, but here even he seems to have got deceived because probably he didn't have access to all this material that we have.
which is really strange because this book by published by Voice of India, authored by Ishwar Sharan, that's been out since the mid 1980s, and I would think that the BJP would be reading such important material put out by Voice of India, not just this particular book, but even books by Sitaram Goel on Christianity, like the many good ones like Jesus Christ, Artifice of Aggression, or History of Hindu-Christian Encounters. I would think he'd be well versed on it, but it's turning out that people in the BJP are just they're turning out to be a real disappointment. They're made out to be these fascists especially where I live. I keep hearing how Modi's this Hitler equivalent, but he doesn't even act like it. He seems rather, he and others in the BJP seem rather clueless.
They don't even push back.
No.
Yes, I agree with you. That actually is quite disappointing. It's not just on the Christian question, but also on the Islamic question. They simply seem to buy off the myths that the Islamists propagate at times. It's only people like you and me who are pushing back. And all we have is the support of our viewers here. And viewers, of course, have been very consistent and very strong in their support. And I think it is time that we also exposed some of these Christian myths. So I think Jaipur Dialogue has been exposing a lot of Islamic myths, but about Christian myths, I think we haven't done so much. And with the assistance of Mission Kali, we hope to bring more and more of these deceits, especially the subtle deceits that the Christians carry out. They have been far more subtle right from the time of the 19th century. And they have been playing mind games. They have, in fact, captured the minds of a lot many people in south of India, and seem to have established that particular discourse, which actually led to this Dravidian Aryan kind of politics in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah. The myth that's propagated that by certain Tamil Christians about Thomas encountering and visiting with Tiruvalluvar, that's been pushed in part to strengthen Dravidian politics. That the very beloved Tamil Sant Tiruvalluvar, beloved by all Tamil people, was in fact not. He did not propagate Vedic thought. They also propagate that Shaivism and Vaishnavism are separate from Vedic thought, from Vedic philosophy, and that it's unique itself to to the Dravidian land, and to the Dravidian culture. So there's another aspect of why the myth still continues and how it's tied up with Dravidian identity, which is completely fabricated. We're all part of the same fabric and always have been. We've never been separate.
So, what do you think is the way ahead? How should we dismantle this myth making? How we should dismantle this Dravidian myth as well? Of course, we have been propagating the lies of the Aryan invasion theory, which is a part and parcel of this. The Anybody who actually goes deep into it would find that the stories and the myth making around Saint Thomas are actually completely contrary to the myth making that is done using the Aryan invasion theory. And yet they're not able to call it out
Yes.
because the myth making from Aryan invasion theory, uh, it has two different legs. But in the Christian lore, they use the what is called the Mosaic ethnology, where they use a particular kind of race theory to make this differentiation between the uh, Aryans in the north and the Dravidians of the south. But where would the Syrian Christians fit into that?
Yeah. That's still something I have no idea where that would fit in, especially if Syrian Christians claim that they're the descendants of Nambudiri Brahmins. Don't Brahmins have an origin, Aryan origin?
So, how would they appropriate the Dravidian identity? I mean, that's very interesting.
There's so many onion layers to this deception. I don't even know where to start, to be honest.
uh, Friends, I would urge you to please start asking questions because we are nearing the end of our talk. Uh, and we would then welcome the audience questions. So, what would you think would be the right way ahead to dismantle this deception?
Well, I believe, for one, that there needs to be a serious archaeological study on the true origins of not just churches like the San Thome Cathedral, but I would also include mosques. There needs to be a more comprehensive archaeological survey, just like what was done at Babri Masjid. And if there is any proof of temples of there being temple ruins, then there needs to be there's serious discussions and laws passed to make sure that those, churches or mosques that were built on destroyed temples need to be claimed back, need to be given by the Waqf board or the church board to rebuild those temples. And there also needs to be an overhaul of the syllabus, especially regarding the St. Thomas myth. And this needs to be taught at all levels, from primary school all the way up to university. That will require an overhaul of the education system. And they haven't even really made any big changes to the syllabus in recent years. Am I correct? I'm
You're
talking with
absolutely
BJP
correct. In
government.
fact, they pride themselves on it, not having changed a single sentence. One of the ministers said, we haven't changed a single sentence. And of course, the only thing that they are planning to change is to bring gender sensitization towards LGBTQ, that kind of a thing.
India is not even close to ready to woke ideology. Why is it jumping ahead? It hasn't even reconciled past problems, and it hasn't even reconciled the true history of India. Why is it going on to these stupid Western fads? It's just ridiculous.
That's because the powers that be aren't
Another
even
thing,
alive to the leftist threat. They think the leftists are their friends, so they can be befriended. You think left can be befriended?
okay, yeah, I don't even want to go there. But another law that needs to be passed is what we just made a film on, Dharmic Heritage Protection Law, which would outlaw these sort of lies and deception, and also the misappropriation of our sacred color like saffron, our rituals, agamas, etc., and would make that illegal. And that would prevent the further erosion of Sanatan Dharma. And this will attack the St. Thomas myth and the other myths surrounding it, because those that propagate it would need to show proof that there was indeed a meeting of minds between Thomas and Thiruvalluvar, for example, and that Thomas influenced the formation of Shaiva Siddhant. But they have no such proof at all whatsoever, and they would need to be held accountable, and they would be held accountable under such a law. That's another way.
In fact, they can be held accountable even under existing law.
How
I
so?
would think. Even under the existing law, this is criminal misappropriation, and I think a well thought out complaint under criminal misappropriation should hold. That's what I think.
Okay.
Uh, on that note, I think we can go to the audience question. I think there's only one or two questions that we can take. And before that, I have to request everyone to please like this video, share it around, and also support us through PayTM GPay. The number is given here. As also, you can go to the description and support us from there, as well as follow our social media handles.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Okay.
Masihi Muslim. What was the state to the common man under Hindu, Muslim, and Christian influence is the key question. Follow one that elevated the common man.
What say you? Really? What are you trying to say?
Oh, well,
Muslims
I
for
think
Jesus? Is that what his picture says? Oh, that's a new one.
yeah, that's a new one. What probably he wants to say that the people were greatly elevated under the influence of Jesus and Muhammad.
Well,
Well,
more so Jesus. If he's saying if he's saying Masihi Muslims. So
yeah.
you're trying to say that the status of the common man was more elevated under Christian influence. Really? You try with really? What did the British do? They just looted the land and didn't leave much infrastructure. Post-independence India, more competent governments built it up. And that under British influence, there were famines, there was typhus outbreaks, there was cholera outbreaks, because they built infrastructure poorly, just enough to support the large machine of British exploitation. They didn't bring anybody up. Not even the Christians are converted under British rule.
Oh, well, the Christians over the 2,000 years that they've been around killed more than 100 million people. So what about that?
If anything,
And the Islamists have killed about 200 million people. And the Marxists, of course, they have killed about 70 million in just 100 years.
yeah. If anything, at least the Syrian Christians had a better time when they were under Hindu rule in Kerala. Before the Portuguese came even.
Right. They had a bad time under the Catholics, and they had to run, actually. They had to run from the Catholics.
Some did, and some were assimilated.
Right. So that's your answer, Masihi Muslim?
Yes.
Jimmy Roy, thank you.
Thank you
for your support. What is the truth about John Bosco Kalyan?
Good question. I can't say I know too much about him other than there are many schools that are in his name, Don Bosco schools all over India. Even my father went to one. He's a Hindu, but he was educated at Don Bosco school from KG until 12th standard. But the most I know is that he was mostly in Italy and that he educated young boys, kept them off the streets. That's about all I know.
Okay. Next. Pankaj Sharma. I have many Christians around my home and they regularly throw some random verses from Bible. How to counter them? Please suggest books.
Well, that's a good question. Whenever they give you random verses that are supposedly proof of the existence of Jesus or Jesus being the savior of all humanity, just point that the Bible is not evidence. The Bible is the claim. And that's what it is. As far as books, there are many, many books I can suggest. One is Jesus Interrupted by Bart Ehrman. I recommend nearly all of Bart Ehrman's books, actually, to learn about the truth of Christianity. And there are a few others that, like Sitaram Goel, I mentioned, Jesus Christ, Artificial Aggression, as well as history of Hindu-Christian encounters, just to start off with.
All right. So, Pankaj, you can start with the Sitaram Goelji's books and Jesus Interrupted.
Yes.
Next.
I have been to that place in Chennai, and now I am ashamed why I didn't know about the history of it earlier. That's okay. That's all right. Now you know better.
Yes. Now we know better, and we need to tell many people around. Not now that we know about it. Next, what is the weak point in Kerala that Islam and Christianity began their journey from Kerala in India?
What is the weak point in Kerala that Islam and Christianity began their journey in Kerala? Well, it's the weak point in all over India. It's tolerance given, and that's a virtue in Sanatana Dharma, that all religious paths are allowed to thrive, because we all have our own dharma to follow. And there was lack of awareness of these two traditions, and with Islam they came in with a bang, especially up north. In Kerala, it might have come peacefully enough through merchants who just carried out trade, but then later it switched to outright brutality and mass slaughter and mass conversion by the sword.
Yeah, right. And also, I could just add to this is that when we tolerate intolerance, that is the beginning of the end of tolerance. Because once intolerance gains, that it doesn't allow any tolerance to flourish. So that's Karl Popper theory.
Oh yeah, the Karl Popper paradox.
Karl Popper paradox. I think everybody can learn about the Karl Popper paradox very properly. Tech savvy, please ask this: how to dismantle Joshua Project and its impact on our culture?
Well, the Joshua Project's funding needs to be banned in India. If it has an FCRA certificate, it needs to be revoked. If any organization in India receives funds from the Joshua Project, then their license needs to be revoked, and their assets need to be confiscated. And anyone that's found to be working with Joshua Project needs to be questioned by your intelligence services. It's NIA, right? That would fall under them.
Quite right. I think the Sri Lankan crisis was precipitated by the Joshua Project, if I'm right.
Yes, many of the leaders of LTTE were actually Christian, not Hindu, and they were the ones that fueled this conflict between the Sinhalese, who are Buddhist, and Tamils, who are majority Hindu, but still they have this percentage of Christians among them.
Prabhakaran himself was a Christian.
Who was?
Prabhakaran, the leader.
Oh, yes.
Oh, it was something like what they did in Rwanda.
Yes, indeed.
So on that point, we come to the end of this session. Thank you very much to all the viewers, and thank you very much, Mayaji. Wonderful session.
Dhanyavad, thank you for having me.
And I think we might need a sequel after we get all the responses. Thank you so much.
All right. Namaskar. Thank you. Dhanyavad.
Namaste. Jai Hind. Vande Mataram.
Vande Mataram.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.